Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen, anybody who may be following us on YouTube. Good evening, colleagues. There being no members of the public present in the meeting, I will dispense with an awful lot of the preliminaries, other than to say mobile phones, please, everybody. Okay, so we can turn straight now to the agenda. Apologies for absence, item 1.
No apologies, Chairman.
Thank you. Any additional declarations of interest? No, thank you. 3, to sign and receive the minutes of the previous meeting. That was the 12th of March. They're in the pack. I agree. Thank you very much, colleagues. No matters notified in advance are urgent, and this is to confirm that everything is in part 1. It is a one-item meeting this evening, and it is the Merkshop Dome site off Breakspear Road, presented by Ian Tyne. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Councillor. Good evening, Councillors. So this is an application under Schedule 17 of the HS2 Act, Part 6 to be exact, in which HS2 Limited, through their contractors, are applying for the use of several roads in our borough to use for more than 24 LGVs in a day. And in this instance, LGV is large goods vehicle over 7.5 tonnes. Not to be confused with LGVs, light goods vehicles, and HGVs, heavy goods vehicles, which inconsistently are referred to in the submission. So this is talking about large goods vehicles, 7.5 tonnes, more than 24 a day. So all we are considering tonight is the use of those roads for more than 24 lorry movements. Those lorries are scheduled to go to the compound just off Breakspear Road South. It flanks either side of Breakspear Road South, so on the west side is the larger compound of the Merkshop Dome facility at the minute, and to the east of the east of Breakspear Road South, where there are several buildings. Essentially, the works for which the lorries will be going to relate to enabling works for the HS2 scheme in its entirety. They will create new permanent access road off Breakspear Road South, utility diversion works, and will involve demolition activities within those sites. So quite a substantial part of the Merkshop Dome MSD facility and the cottages to the east of Harville Road Breakspear Road South, will be destroyed. And the lorries will be doing that work. So as part of the submission, we're being informed, although these are not up for consideration today, informed that there will be 3 new access roads, use of a widening of an existing one for the MSD facility, of which a haul road will run alongside, and then the new access to the MSD facility, which will remain in part following the completion of HS2, so will require a new access to the north of that, and then obviously to the east of Breakspear Road South, a new access to demolish the existing cottages. And that's the routes, the roads that are being requested for our approval. So we got Swakeleys Road and then up to Breakspear Road South. The A40, although in our borough, is not part of our road network, so that has got the approval of Transport for London, and there's no requirement for this local authority to have been involved in that approval. We're not the Highways Authority for that. There's an aerial of the site with the compound in its place. And for reference, this is the line of HS2 as it goes through the MSD facility. You can see it just crossing Breakspear Road South there, right through the access to the existing facility and over quite a lot of the buildings, hence the reason for the works. Slightly blurred aerial here, more recent. You can see some of the works have already taken place. It's important to point out that these works do not require London Borough of Hillingdon consent, so this is temporary activity undertaken through the Act, and that's already got permission through Parliament and Royal Assent. So all we're now being asked to do is whether or not these sites can be accessed for 24 lorry movements a day, and in considering whether or not the roads can be used for 24 lorry movements or more a day, we are only allowed to look at various types of arrangements associated with the movements, and our consideration is limited to preserving the local environment or local amenity, to prevent or reduce prejudicial effects on road safety or on the free flow of traffic in the local area, or to preserve a site of archaeological or historical interest or nature conservation value. And importantly, whether or not the operations can be amended or modified to be able to demonstrate those arrangements. So in terms of the officers' report, officers have recommended it for approval, subject to the imposition of an informative requesting a specific traffic management plan. Under the other requirements of the HS2 Act, HS2 Limited are required to submit a traffic management plan for each of their work sites. And this includes how traffic will be managed on those roads. So not just LGVs, but also non-LGV traffic, staff cars, small vans, so on and so forth. The council does get involved in these, but there's no formal sign-off procedure in place at the minute. So in other words, that doesn't come back through to a committee to sign off. Our experience to date is sketchy, with HS2 Limited on the approval of these traffic management plans before works become in place. But nonetheless, there is a requirement for them to undertake a specific traffic management plan and for us to consider it and, in theory, approve it. So the officer recommendation is for approval. There's been no consultee requirements on this one. No consultation responses from the members of the public. So without further ado, Councillor, subject to approval, subject to the informative as mentioned below.
Thank you very much, Ian. Colleagues, our role here is to facilitate the will of Parliament and the construct of High Speed 2, but balancing it against the interests of the community. And Parliament has clearly recognised our role here and being best placed to do that by giving us these powers and considerations with regards to road safety and free flow of traffic. So that is where we need to come from, is to bear in mind that issue. And what we have before us, in my view, gives us no information about the impact this is going to have on our free flow of traffic. And therefore, in the absence of information, it is impossible for us to form a view on whether or not the proposal will cause gridlock and will be significantly prejudicial to the free flow of traffic. So that are my thoughts. Councillor Lavery, you have indicated his desire.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I will echo that. I mean, we have a report before us that potentially has 160 two-way LGV movements for, in varying formats for up to 2 years. It reduces down, reduces up, but that's the sort of scale of what we're talking about. The report makes clear the submission fails to provide information on how the proposal would impact traffic during peak periods. And there are concerns, and we have an informative. Now, to me, and I know this is strange planning and the legislation is very restrictive, but that does seem quite weak. I mean, normally in planning terms, an informative is something you're drawing to somebody's attention and they can do what they want with it. We are asking, or the route they're using up Swakeleys Road and up Breakspear Road South, all of us know that in the morning rush hour coming south, that is extremely crowded already, and in the evening rush hour going back north, it's exactly the same. Now, this is an unusual, HS2 is an unusual animal, but in any other scheme of this size, of this number of lorry movements, we would be seeking to impose controls, certainly on those peak periods, as to what could happen and how many lorry movements we were happy to see, because anything of this sort of scale during those periods will cause total chaos. We would also, I suspect, on any other scheme with this level of traffic, be looking at the Breakspear Road, those junctions, and whether some form of controls was required on those. I think about lorries that might wish to turn right, for example, on the northbound run, and even the lorries turning left out of the site, turning left and coming back south. It's not the largest road in the world. It's pretty much a one-track road, whichever way you do it. So lorries waiting to come in and out could certainly cause traffic chaos to us. So I would, be welcoming guidance from officers as if there is a way that this can be strengthened to at least ensure that this traffic management plan does actually come forward and that the authority has an opportunity to consider it. Now, the officer presentation indicated we can look at local amenity and road safety and free flow of traffic. There is certainly a free flow of traffic and road safety issue with this route. There is no doubt about that, and anyone who knows it, I think all colleagues would, I'm sure, agree with me. And I would welcome a guide as to how we can perhaps strengthen this to ensure that HS2 do actually do what they say they're going to do, and when it exceeds the 24 they can do without anything, that actually there's a proper traffic management plan in place. I know it can't be a pre-commencement condition because I have read my notes post-holiday about those rules, but I'm sure there's a form of word somewhere. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lavery. I will bring the Borough Solicitor in a second. I'll take Councillor Oswald, though, on as well first.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairman. Yeah, it's a case of untie my hands, isn't it, I think. I won't repeat what Councillor Lavery has already said, because he's right. It's overcapacity at the moment in that area, especially around Ickenham, and I can't... It really bothers me when I read this and I saw all these lorry movements. We knew this was going to be problematic when this first hit the table, and we had this conversation before about lorry movements and everything else. We knew that this was going to be problematic. I don't know whether... there's not enough information in here, Chairman. You're absolutely right what you said. There isn't anything in here that gives us any details about a traffic plan. If we can keep vehicles out between these times that's on this piece of A4 paper, 7:30 to 9:30 and 16:30 to 18:30, well, that would be a start. It would be a start, but I'm just wondering whether or not, and I would seek officers' guidance on this as well, whether or not we could refuse this, because we just don't have the information that we need. We knew that this was going to be problematic. Breakspear Road South at the moment is, I think it's closed because there's a burst water main, but it's not in a very good condition anyway. It's absolutely awful. I drive that way quite a lot going to Mount Vernon. Reasons don't matter, but I think you probably know them anyway. But the point is, the road isn't in very good condition up to that site. In fact, it's pretty awful where this is going to be. So I'd seek officers' guidance, Chairman, whether or not we could approve this without the details that we haven't got, basically. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I may, I'll bring the Borough Solicitor in at this point. The question we're being asked here is the extent to which we can strengthen our response to this application by requiring an agreed traffic plan that controls movement to mitigate against the free flow of traffic, rather than just having an informative. How will you advise the committee on that matter, please?
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening to all members of the subcommittee. I wholly agree with the sentiments expressed by Councillor Lavery. Informatives, to a large extent, are not really worth the paper that they're written on. They don't establish any mandatory requirements which a proposed developer should observe. So my advice is that the informative in the report would be too weak, particularly in light of the concerns raised by members. There is a halfway house here, and the advice that I would give the committee is that your concerns could be addressed satisfactorily by the imposition of a condition to any approval which may be given this evening. And you'll all know that a condition, obviously, unlike a informative, is very, very effective, and it is enforceable, and it has full effect in planning law. And under Schedule 17, Paragraph 6 of the High Speed 2 Act, that specifies the circumstances in which a local planning authority may impose conditions on approvals, which is what you're being asked to consider this evening. And the requirements are you can only impose conditions with the agreement of the nominated undertaker, which in this case is High Speed 2 Limited. I just want to make it clear that we have not as yet secured High Speed 2 Limited's agreement to this condition. The second basis on which we can impose a condition is on the ground referred to in Schedule 17, paragraph 6, and there are three grounds, and you may be familiar with these from previous meetings. And what that says is that the arrangements ought to be modified to preserve the local environment or local amenity. I don't think that's applicable here. Secondly, to preserve a site of archaeological or historic interest or nature conservation value. Again, that is not applicable to these circumstances. The third requirement is to prevent or reduce prejudicial effects on road safety or on the free flow of traffic in the local area, and that is very, very relevant to this evening's application. So you can oppose a condition if you have the consent of High Speed 2 Limited in its capacity as nominated undertaker, and you can also impose a condition if you're satisfied that you need to modify the arrangements in order to prevent or reduce prejudicial effects on road safety or on the free flow of traffic in the local area. And at the pre-meeting we did discuss this with the chairman, and myself and Mr. Thine have come up with a form of wording which we would like to put to the committee. Hopefully you should all have this sheet of paper in front of you. It's an A4 sheet of paper, and what it says is this. If you don't mind, Chairman, I'd like to read this out. The local planning authority is satisfied that the arrangements ought to be modified to prevent or reduce prejudicial effects on road safety or free flow of traffic in the local area. So that satisfies the first limb of the High Speed 2 Act, which I've just read out. The second part is, and subject to High Speed 2 Limited agreeing to the imposition of a condition. They haven't done so yet, so this is subject to them agreeing to the imposition of a condition to the effect that, and the condition is set out in inverted commas and in italics. Prior to the use of the roads, which are the subject of the Schedule 17 application, High Speed 2 Limited, in its capacity as nominated undertaker, shall submit a traffic management plan specific to the proposed works for this lorry route approval, which should be agreed in writing with the LPA. This plan should indicate the measures to reduce the impacts on peak hours traffic, so 7:30 to 9:30 and 16:30 to 18:30, and include workforce numbers with activity profiles, details of access and egress arrangements at work sites, and general traffic management arrangements. And this is important because we can't just have a traffic management plan in place and we have no ability to specify how High Speed 2 Limited should comply with it. So the next sentence is very important. The operation of the roads must proceed in accordance with the agreed traffic management plan. And subject to those requirements, the subcommittee resolves to give approval to the Schedule 17 application. And the reason why this particular recommendation has been framed in this way is that if you agree to it, it will save the committee from having to meet again to consider this particular application. But I would stress that we have thought very long and hard about it, and we do feel that if the committee is minded to agree to this condition, it would provide a lot of assurances to the concerns which have been expressed by members.
Thank you very much, Raj. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted some clarification. In the report, at the top of page 8, it talks about up to a peak of 160 two-way LGV movements between September 18 and January 19. And then on page 15, it talks about 200 LGVs per week between September and January. So a difference then. I noticed that's for 5 months, and thereafter it will reduce to 24 until July 2019 for approximately 1 month. So I wasn't quite sure of the figures. I do very much welcome officers and the Borough Solicitors and Mr Thine's recommendation, because I think we have to know what effect it has. Breakspear Road South, I mean, it goes through Greenbelt, goes through sort of wooded parts of the borough, and only on Friday I was returning from Harefield and part of the road was closed off with a police blockade because 2 trees had come down. So, I mean, this is the sort of thing that happens, you know, where you've got long established wooded areas, old trees will come down, etc. And there isn't a footpath along this road, although people do walk part of that road. So I think, I don't know, will they be keeping records of vehicles going in and out? Will that be part of the traffic plan? Because otherwise, how would we know what was happening, even though we put the condition on? I hope the more detailed traffic plan is going to give us that kind of information. And there are going to be occasions when, I suppose, heavier vehicles will be brought in for different emergencies or things that were not anticipated. What happens? I mean, I know that Hillingdon has been put in this position through the Act that was passed, where we are meant to sit here like nodding dogs, and I think I use that term, and I think we all resent that. But on the other hand, we know that it has been approved through a legal and democratic process, and that we don't want to, you know, make difficulties that are spurious. But in this case, I think there's a real issue, and I'd like some reassurance about that, because there are people who use that road regularly, some people who walk that road, particularly dog walkers and people like that in the area, and there are classes and children who go to certain parts of that area for, you know, nature study classes and things like that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very grateful to you, because it had missed me by those differences in numbers, and I'm actually not clear on what we're now being asked to do. and that is very remiss of me as chairman. I've not picked up on that level of detail. So we really need to nail here what is it that we are agreeing is the limit in numbers, and also we need to answer the question about how is this monitored and enforced and managed. And I think with further bit we'd like to bring in, and probably bring in the head of planning or the borough solicitor, is what happens if High Speed 2 weren't to agree to this condition. I think we need some clarity on that.
Could you just, I think on the numbers, if you read another couple of paragraphs down, I think it might help a little.
Yes, I think we need to be very specific about what our traffic management plan says. There needs to be a maximum number of movements per week.
I think one is talking maximum, the other is talking averages, and I think that's where the two numbers vary.
I think we need to be expressly clear, and what we are saying is there needs to be maybe a daily maximum that's here. You know, there's no point in bunging the borough up for a week, but then say, well, the other 3 weeks it was fine. I think we need to smooth this flow of traffic around.
Yeah, if I can, Chairman, I mean, averages, how you work out averages is just the highs and the lows, and you get somewhere in between. So what are the highs? So, yeah, I think we do need to, we want to know what a maximum's going to be.
Okay.
If I can say something that might help the committee, I think the figures here are obviously taken from the rather limited submission from HS2. The point of the condition is we will get more clearer information, and I think that in itself should hopefully address the concern. And the other point I wanted to say is I do spend half my life as head of planning looking at planning conditions, and I'd just like to endorse the condition that the Borough Solicitor and Ian have drafted, because I think I was listening carefully to what Councillor Lavery said, and I do think this condition covers all the issues that are raised, and I think it is a quite robustly worded condition from my point of view.
What happens if High Speed 2 don't agree?
Then there will be deemed a refusal of the application.
Okay. So if they were not to agree to this condition, it is deemed refused. Okay. That's the position we're in. So where are we on that? Ian, yes.
So I was just going to come back to the councillor's comments on the sort of the general approach to the figures in here. So you've spotted a significant flaw in the information that has been submitted. Going back to the paragraphs, as Councillor Labour mentioned, the first figures at 200 relate to weekly movements, so that's 400 per week, so 200 in, 200 out. The maximum peak period of traffic is difficult to work out from HS2 submissions. We have a table in one of the reports that they've submitted which talks about 80 LGV movements per day, 40 in, 40 out, for the new haul road construction of the MSD facility, and then a table underneath that which says demolition and site clearance works up to 80 LGV movements per day, 40 in, 40 out. So we've added them up and got 160. HS2 Limited haven't added them up and stayed at 80. So we've taken the higher figure, but that sort of illustrates the point that the submission of material is not adequate, is not good enough. That's why we need a secondary process. And I think the condition is the way of capturing that.
Thank you. I don't believe that we have the knowledge or expertise around this table to be setting a limit. What we need to be doing is saying to the officers, a limit needs to be clearly identified that ensures reasonable free flow of traffic. And expressly, we are looking to have almost a zero limit during the peak hours, because we know that those roads are already exceeding capacity. And we don't want to add to it during that period. But I do know from my own knowledge that there is spare capacity outside of those peak hours. And it's to find the capacity and then to clearly define what that maximum is what we would be looking for in a traffic management plan. Raj.
May I just say thank you, Chairman. If I could just draw your attention once again to the condition which has been drafted. If you look at the fifth line down, it says, shall submit a traffic management plan specific to the proposed works for this lorry route approval, which should be agreed in writing by the LPA. So they require our approval in writing, and if we're not happy with the numbers, then we have the leverage to go back to them and ask for clarification or even possible reductions. So that is the caveat, and we put that into the condition, not just agreed with the LPA, agreed in writing with the LPA, so there'll be a proper audit trail in process. I did want to just stress that, if I may.
Thank you. Councillor Avery, you indicated?
Yeah, I mean, that, given the nature of this process and given the restrictions that are imposed upon us, which are considerable, I think the borough's solicitor's proposed suggestion of a condition would satisfy, my concerns. I accept HS2 might not agree it, and in that case, I would be perfectly comfortable with it being refused on that basis. It does seem to provide us with a way forward and also a plan that would address our principal concerns. We're not experts in traffic management, and wouldn't claim to be, but I think we're not doing our duty to protect our residents if we don't get them to do something, and I think this would do it.
Are you moving?
I'd be happy to move that subject to others, but I'd be happy to move that.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan.
Seek clarification. Sorry to prolong this. In this traffic management plan, that would set numbers, would it? And they would be monitored and recorded. And if they exceeded those numbers, then presumably we don't go for enforcement, but we would have to negotiate something with them at that point, or it would have to come back to committee, would it? I just want to understand the process a bit, because I don't want us to agree this and then find that, they... Something else is happening. Yes.
Thank you, Councillor. It is a tricky one. Obviously, counting lorries into and out of sites is not going to be overly straightforward. This has been a key part of the residents' concerns since we first found out that this was taking place in our backyard, so to speak. There is a requirement on the contractors to set up a monitoring process, so sort of digital GPS measured, and we're supposed to get reports on that on a daily. We haven't actually worked out the processes for that, but we would expect to get reports on a regular basis. Obviously, the problems with this is that we're talking about peak loads of traffic, so it might be 1 or 2 weeks where if they did breach, and it would be on them. But if they did breach, we probably, depending on the processes for monitoring, may not be able to solve the problems in the 2 weeks, and they may go back down to normal traffic levels after that. None of that's been agreed yet, so I would, through the traffic management plan, particularly with different sets of contractors in play here, and this is enabling works, not the main works contractors, who we've been discussing the monitoring with, because traffic will get worse with the main works. Let's not forget that. So I think it's important to get it right now. And I think as part of the traffic management plan, we would have a section on there on monitoring, with regular reporting to the local authority. If they breached it, if it's a planning condition, then there's opportunities for planning enforcement. As a traffic management plan, it also forms part of the environmental minimum requirements, so they would be in breach of basically what has been set out in the Act, and then that starts to get raised through the Secretary of State level and a higher level through there. So we would have a twin-prong attack, if you like, in that instance, through planning, through the environmental minimum requirements.
Thank you very much. Councillor Chandal.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't want to repeat what everybody else has said, but I agree. We may not be experts on traffic plans, but we are experts on the roads in Hillingdon, especially Breakspear, and we know exactly. We all drive through it, and I'm happy to second it with all that's been said and with the condition that's been proposed.
Very grateful to you, Frank colleague. So, for clarity, being proposed and seconded, that we agree this application subject to the condition as worded, read out by the Borough Solicitor and as printed and published before you. Is that agreed, colleagues? Thank you very much. That's approved unanimously. And the meeting... Councillor Lavery wishes to...
Yeah, just one minor housekeeping, but you agreed the minutes 12th of March. We didn't formally sign off the 10th of May. I don't want Democratic Services to be...
Thank you so much. That is oversight number 2. You see my interest has been focused elsewhere on this particular matter. Now, these minutes agreed. Thank you. That's it. The meeting is now closed. Thank you.